Hello, everyone. My name is Madeline Jones. My presentation today is on how men's perceived non-conforming gender expression and sexual orientation affect social distance. This study was conducted under the IRB of University of Louisiana at Lafayette and under the supervision of Dr. Hung-Chu Lin. So the big question for my presentation is, does gender expression and of course sexual orientation affect people's social distance? So we used 4 vignettes or descriptions of a man whose name is Frank. So Frank is described as either a conforming man or a non-conforming man, where conforming is deemed typical of appearance and just ways that he interacts and acts like a man, versus how non-conforming, which was described as saying that he wears nail polish and a little bit of eyeliner, and he just doesn't act like the typical standard, the typical man. And so Frank then is disclosed as being either gay or heterosexual later on. So we ask about social distance both before and after sharing sexual orientation. And the presentation kind of goes like this, where one participant is either given the conforming or the non-conforming gender expression, asked about social distance, and then given told either that he is gay, heterosexual. So then we ask about social distance again. So as you can see here, we have these 4 total paths or conditions: the conforming gay, the non-conforming gay, the conforming heterosexual, and the non-conforming heterosexual. And so we really want to understand change in social distance, as well. Does social distance increase or decrease after learning about sexual orientation? And this will help us to kind of determine if it's gender expression truly that is driving these results. So we have a couple of hypotheses. First of all, we expect that gender expression and sexual orientation and their interaction will all predict social distance. And I guess I should have clarified this a little bit before, but when I'm talking about social distance, I'm talking about people's willingness to engage in the social sphere. I'm not talking just about people trying to stay 6 feet away. It's how much is a person willing to engage, such as, are they willing to talk to you, sit beside you, invite them over to the house, stay at a party, be in a room alone with them? But how does that change things? So we expected that the non-conforming gender expression, non-conforming sexual orientation, and the combination of these two would elicit the most social distance, which we're using as a proxy for discrimination. So our second hypothesis, the one to look at, well, maybe it's an association between gender expression and assumed sexual orientation. So maybe that when someone sees them and they appear non-conforming, they actually just dislike them because they assume a particular sexual orientation. So hypothesis 2 was to examine whether this relationship existed. We then wanted to test, well, does this relationship then affect social distance? And how does this relate to gender expression? So that was explored in hypothesis 3. And so we assumed that the non-conforming gender expression would elicit a non-heterosexual assumed sexual orientation, and that the non-heterosexual and assumed non-heterosexual orientation, if it changed, if say you assumed that someone was heterosexual and you found out that he was non-heterosexual, then that would result in an increase in social distance. So for hypothesis 1, we created a base model to control for all of these socio-demographic covariates. As you can see here, the model is significant, and we see that social desirability is fine, and political stance conservatives generally rated higher than liberal participants. So the reference group there is liberal. For the second step, we have target factors, and we examined target gender expression and target sexual orientation. As you can see, it's significant improvement in the model, and then target gender expression is significant, such that the targets that were gay were actually preferred over the targets that were heterosexual. For the third step, we looked at full factorial interactions, and we found that this was an improvement in the model, and that target gender expression was significant as well as the interaction between gender expression and sexual orientation. So for target gender expression, we see that the non-conforming group is preferred over the conforming group. And then for the interaction, we found actually that the conforming non-heterosexual man was preferred over the non-conforming non-heterosexual over the conforming non-heterosexual men, but there's no difference between the non-conforming groups. So for the second hypothesis, we saw that target gender expression significantly predicted an assumed non-heterosexual orientation. So when the target gender expression was found out to be non-heterosexual, they found that he was up to 262 times more likely. Sorry, if you were given a target with a non-conforming gender expression, you were 262 times more likely to assume a non-heterosexual orientation. So whenever we looked at the moderation conflation beliefs, we saw no difference. And then we looked at a full factorial interaction to see if there might be, and we still saw no difference. And as you can see, there's no really increase in the R squared in our model. As you can see here, though, you can see just the disproportionate amount of people who were given a non-conforming gender expression and assumed some sort of non-heterosexual orientation compared to the conforming target who was given disproportionately a number of heterosexual orientations assumed. So lastly, we want to look at how does assumed to disclose target sexual orientation relate to social distance change. And as you can see here, all of these are different than 0, so except for non-heterosexual to gay. So this is essentially 0. And what we see is that non-heterosexual to heterosexual had an increase in social distance change. So that means that when they found out that they were heterosexual, they actually shied away further from them. Same thing with heterosexual to heterosexual. They actually shied away from the target further. However, whenever they found that Frank was gay, they actually preferred him, interestingly enough. And then these brackets indicate that these are a positive difference compared to heterosexual to gay. Even the non-heterosexual to gay 0, right, is a lot different than being an average negative 0.5. So, and I want to clarify here that these y-axes, all of these in all of the graphs are standard z values. So that is our results. Thank you. If you have any questions, please let me know. But I do want to share that some of the explanations may be simply that our target's gender expression may not have been salient enough or considered egregious enough of a violation to warrant discrimination. So that might be some of the differences that you might find in this study compared to other studies. Another potential limiting factor about this study may simply be that it doesn't have to mean that just because you are non-conforming that people are necessarily going to move away from you. Or, it may even be that people might be serving a protective factor. And lastly, we really do see people preferring the non-heterosexual men over the heterosexual men. And this may be potentially just because, and the non-conforming may be because of this assumption of non-heterosexual orientation, and maybe because, it may possibly be because people are trying to recognize diversity and affirm it and be more inclusive. So this might have potential positive influences in the future. Thank you very much. Please let me know if you have any questions again.